Okay, awesome. So let me start with, I hate monologues. I love conversations. Feel free to jump in with questions at any time. And happy to answer them, even if we took a little bit of a left turn. I think the guys just did a really good job of emphasizing the fact that this is a meetup, and we're all here to learn from each other. So with that, let me dive right in. Prudential is a 145-year-old cornerstone of the life insurance industry. We started in life insurance. We're now a financial services company. Life insurance is still a huge part of what we do, but we've expanded to so much, much more. And you'll hear a little bit more about the size and complexity as we dive into it, but this is sort of the about Prudential slide. I've been with Prudential for almost 5 years. I am currently the customer domain and product owner of the customer domain. This is my third job within Prudential. We believe in internal mobility. I started out doing new product development, agile, uh, test and learn type of thing, develop fast, fail fast, learn fast, iterate. Moved on to owning the data teams, including data development and data science development. And as of January of last year, I started the customer domain team. My background is about 50-50 big company and startup. I don't seem to hit anything in the middle. I tend to go to both extremes. Prudential, 28 million customers, 35,000 employees, 1.4 whatever trillion in assets, ridiculously large, down to a 10-man startup. So I don't seem to land anywhere in between. But that's also really focused the way I run the teams and I run my projects. We're very agile. We're very startup centric. Everybody rolls up their sleeves and everybody gets that stuff done. So with that to the team, we started in January of 2022. It was me, my program manager / RTE, and my development lead, and that was January of 2022. We quickly grew to 5 teams. We're a mix of Safe Agile and Scrum Agile. We do it all. We do data development. We do services development. We do DevOps. We don't do UI because we're not a UI team. We're a platform team. So we really don't have any UIs to speak of. We're about 50-50 onshore, offshore, but we're moving to a 70-30 onshore, offshore model as a company. And I think that's a great thing because it allows you to retain more of your intellectual property. So at Prudential, we are in the middle of an application modernization and cloud migration process, which is taking older legacy systems or systems that need to be modernized and or replaced. They are being modernized, and we're moving into the cloud. It is an opportunity to enhance functionality, enhance performance, add new capabilities, do all the things the right way in a modern microservices, cloud-centric approach. Generally, my approach here is build IP, build buy commodities. What does that mean? That means that we focus our engineering efforts into building the intellectual property that makes us who we are, but we buy the commodities. I should not have to reinvent the wheel every time I need to go build a queue. I should not have to, get queuing built from scratch. Start with the most basic of databases, messaging, email, all those things that are foundations to an application. We are leveraging, best of breed cloud, AWS services or infrastructure, because that's not where we should be spending our time. We should be spending our time building our intellectual property. We are the customer domain. What is our goal? Our goal really is to collect all of the data from all of the places where it sits in the company, and that's all of the customer data. And this is, B2C, not B2B. There are other B2B areas that are focusing on that. So there's over 15 backend systems, mostly mainframes. There's 25 external data feeds, multiple lines of business. The data is in multiple places and with multiple standards. So we're trying to create a single source of high quality, fully mastered customer data. And then that becomes the single endpoint for all of our internal applications to go consume that data. What does that mean? It means we're doing a bunch of things to the data. We're standardizing it, we're mastering it, we're deduplicating, and we're making it available in a way that is performant via microservices and platforms. And so all you have to know is the endpoint of where the data is that you need, and you can get that data. We're as an endpoint, we want to migrate some of these functionalities to the cloud, but we also want to deprecate some fairly large chunks of infrastructure. There's a large mainframe, there's a large Oracle instance, and there's a lot of bespoke data processing code that we want to just shut down. So that's huge for us. And this was started as a application modernization, not necessarily a business value project, which means that nobody started out with, if we do this, we'll save X number of millions of dollars, or we'll make X numbers of additional millions of dollars, right? It was a application modernization first and foremost, but there is a significant cost savings involved. So you've heard me talk about some of those challenges. The data is in a bunch of different places in a bunch of different formats. It's not just in databases, but it's also in external data feeds that we don't actually have a lot of control on. The data gets processed in various frequencies. Some things are real time, some things are batch, some things are batch that we may only be able to update once a week because they are fairly old mainframe systems. There's a lot of stuff there that is at least a decade or two old, works perfectly fine, but it only does the one thing, and it only does the one thing very well. But to do anything else with it is very difficult, and to get it to do things like eventing or real time or dynamic data handling, it's not going to happen where it is. So we really have to pull it into a central location. In addition, some of that data is already being aggregated into other mainframe systems. So there's mainframes in front of mainframes, adding as an additional layer of complexity. And that means that not just in that other mainframe system, but in operational data stores that serve web front ends, and a bunch of other different places, there's more than one copy of that customer data. So keeping that customer data in sync is always going to be a huge challenge. So by moving all of that data to a central place where it's standardized and mastered, there's only that one place that manages it. And that is a two-way management. It's both read and write, and it's read and write from the front end, and it's write back to those source systems where the contract information is held, if those source systems can actually take the write back. In some cases, they can't. And finally, we have a lot of stuff that is in an IPSIDIC format. There are files that are being generated by these mainframes that are mainframe file formats that we need to get out of the data center, move into the cloud, and we need to convert it to JSON so we can actually do something with it in the cloud. So that's been a really interesting challenge where, I think I actually had to look up something up in a textbook at one point because it's been that long since I've looked at anything like this. And just trying to go through that modernization of moving things from a mainframe file format to a modern JSON format has had some very interesting challenges along the way. What did we create? We've created 4 platforms along the way. We've created a data gateway, a customer profile microservices platform, a preferences microservices platform, and a universal identifier platform. What are those things? The data gateway is what takes all that data from all of those different data sources and standardizes, right? We do map, merge, split, dedupe, and master are the 5 operations that we're worried about in there in order to get that standardization. And I'll give you a really good example. Marital status may be indicated different ways in all of those different systems. 1 or 2, 0 and 1, yes and no, right? So none of that really makes sense. So what we did is we partnered with the CDO within the organization, and they came up with data standards for things like marital status, gender. We moved to a standard ISO country and state code, whereas some of our backend systems are using IRS standards. And we're continuing to move along that list of standards, and we're trying to come up with a common definition for the organization that everybody can leverage. And we're making those standards part of our core platform so that anything that runs through it goes through that standardization process. Customer profile microservice, very self-explanatory. It is a microservice by which you access your customer data. Right now, it is a 1-tier API where you can call it directly, but we're probably going to be moving into a 2-tier API system where tier 1 is actually taking the requests, and it may look a lot like what current systems are talking to. So the process of migrating to the new platform is not as time consuming for all these applications that are consuming the data, but it also allows us to do microservices that are very, very focused on the one thing that people need to get rather than being able to hit the main API. That main API is both a customer profile service, but it's also a search service, and you can search against all of the data. If you are entitled to that search, you can search for anything you need. And one of the things we did split out as part of a separate platform is microservices. The profile microservice. Preferences microservice, third time's the charm. Preferences sounds like it should be part of customer, but it really isn't if you're trying to stay in a microservices world. Preferences really needs to be its own thing because you may need it separate from the customer data, and we should not be returning all of the data about the customer every time there's a call, right? We should only be returning whatever front end data is needed by that application at the time. And there are cases where and in many cases, you're not even going to need this preferences information as part of the profile call. So we broke it out in order to keep it as a true microservice. And the fourth thing, which looks like the smallest thing here, which is the universal identifier, is probably the most important thing. Along with having data in multiple different systems, we also have different identifiers for our users, right? And luckily we've moved past such archaic things like social security number. That's not something we use or have, I think, in a very, very long time. But there's identifiers that are unique to the application that they're in, which a lot of people leverage. So there's a backend system called CIS, and there's a CIS ID, and a lot of systems will search against CIS ID or need to pass CIS ID in order to be able to communicate with other systems. But I think at this point, we're probably up to 8 different internal identifiers between all of the systems we're looking at. So what we've done is we've introduced the concept of the universal identifier. It is a true universal identifier for all of our customers, which has no tie back to PII. It's got no tie back to anything that is actually exploitable. So even if you see a universal identifier, it's not going to get you anything. And it is only an internal universal identifier. So that allows us to have communication between, say, the customer domain and the contract domain using only that universal identifier, which ensures that we're always getting that unique individual that we're looking for. With an active customer database of 28 million people and an extended database of I think 55 million people is what we've gotten latest count, which includes potential duplicates, which includes things like in the backend systems, we are contract centric, which means that if you own 2 contracts, there's 2 records for you, or executed contracts that we need to keep on the books because you may need to look them up. We're looking at a universe of 55 million people. That is what, about 20% of the adult US population easily. So it becomes very difficult to identify you uniquely, even if we go into the databases and look you up by first, last, and the last 4 digits of your SOCH. It doesn't guarantee uniqueness. But with universal identifier, coupled with the mastering process and coupled with the standardization process that we've done in Data Gateway, we can guarantee that the person you're looking for and the person we've returned to you are exactly that person that you need. So universal identifier is hugely important in all of this in order to make all of these things work. And of course, as part of universal identifier, we're preserving all of the former identifiers that you have. So if you're in an older application that only knows how to use CIS ID but not universal ID, you can continue to function. Although CIS is one of those mainframe systems we're going to retire. So eventually you're going to have to adopt universal identifier. But I cannot overemphasize the importance of universal identifier in order to get people to have that level of uniqueness. So really, really important part. And finally, we're 100% in the cloud. And these icons aren't just sort of a random grab bag of icons. These are actually all the technologies that we're using for our application in the cloud. So 100% in the cloud from day one, which is very, very important to us. And by the way, please feel free to jump in and ask questions. I hate monologuing and I love answering questions. So anyone have any questions so far? Okay. So there are two.
Sorry, a quick question. Yeah, so just curious, do you maintain a mapping from your UID to the customer keys in the different SORs? Because I assume there is some sort of mapping so that you can correlate records between different systems.
Yep, exactly. So what we do is in the process of ingesting all the records, if let's say we find 4 records for you, and each of those 4 has an identifier that is one of the identifiers that it was associated with the original record. We have SSO ID, INDV ID, ANSOL ID, and CIS ID, say 4 of those. Those will be kept in a table that is cross-referenceable that you can search against. So we always maintain that data lineage and integrity, not just because it makes it searchable, because it also makes it auditable. right? We should always be able to track back a change to its source. So one of the core principles of what we built for the data ingestion gateway is that if for some reason, when it gets to the endpoint, say the online experience, and a change gets made, we need to be able to track where that record came from all the way down to inception. So to do that, we also maintain that mapping 100% of the time, and we also have something called a correlation ID, which you'll never see, but it's also a way of us telling where the data came from. So if we dive into this, you'll hear me say a lot of belts, suspenders, and a rope, because we are regulated. We are a financial industry. We are very careful of our people and our data. You'll see that we institute more than one way of auditing our data, in some cases 3 or 4, which was incredibly important to us. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
And Marcelo, yeah, we have 2 more questions here in the chat.
Yeah,
so
shoot.
Tracy Legrand, she's saying, how did you handle duplicate costs of continuing to operate the mainframe CIS and the new cloud-based CIS equivalent?
Not as well as I would have liked. So it's so CIS is going to get shut off. So what we're doing is when we originally did the estimation for effort, we looked at it as a ramp down. And currently we have operating costs that are split between people and CPU. Basically, we get charged by the use. So what we did is we predicted a ramp down in cost for a one-time investment that over I think 3 years more than recoups the initial investment. So that's how we worked out the finances on that. And we're shutting down CIS, which is an Oracle DB2 mainframe. We're shutting down PruDB, which is a fairly large implementation of Oracle RAC, which if you use Oracle, you know it's very expensive, and a pretty big Hadoop cluster that we were using to do some custom Scala work to actually import data into PruDB. So if you look at the costs involved in running all of those things and our ability to actually shut them down and replace them with a single cost-effective product or set of platforms in the cloud, the finances actually made sense. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you, Marcelo.
Okay, thank you.
That's great.
And what was the next one?
So yeah, we have one last one. Can you please talk a bit about Universal ID? How are you generating it in a distributed environment?
So Universal ID is its own platform. It literally is standalone. We actually jokingly call it the human VIN number, because if you're familiar with the VIN number in your car, if you look at that ID, you can actually look at it and see things like make and model and color and year. It's code, but it's a readable code. And the reason we did that is because it also allows us to do some troubleshooting very easily. So first of all, we have a very good random number generator seed. And there's 3 steps. There's the generation, the ledgering, and the distribution. With the seed generation, I think we had the 1 in 2 trillion or 3 in 2 trillion chance of having created a duplicate, very, very small. But to that, we added prefixes that tell you whether this is a dev or QA generated number. We never want to cross universes. You cross streams, bad things happen. We also added a prefix that tells us which LOB created it and which international region created it, because we're international ready. Prudential is very, very large. It's very international, and a lot of our customers, the 28 million is just in the US, by the way, are outside the US. So we made this in a way that is actually distributable to different areas, but that universal identifier would be usable. So that's the generation. The ledgering is we actually write down every time we generate a universal identifier, because even if it is a 1 in trillion chance that you're going to create a duplicate, we want to ensure that it has not been created as a duplicate. We also will allows us to audit the changes that have been made. We know when we created that universal identifier, we know who requested it, and we know where it went. So we keep track of that. So that's the ledgering. And the distribution can happen 2 ways. One is we do initial load. We know that you need 1.5 million universal identifiers for that. Initial load will generate 1.5 million, and that'll go to the app, and the 2 pieces get put together. The other way is via API. You can request, if you are on the whitelist of people who are allowed to request a universal identifier, you can hit an API and request up to N number of identifiers. It's N number because performance-wise, we could probably generate a couple of thousand very, very quickly, but we don't want that to become the way that people are trying to do large implementations, because it then has potential issues for unused universal identifiers, which is also a bad thing. So in the distribution, you can actually do a request response in an API and say, give me 10 universal identifiers. You know who I am because I'm on the whitelist, and here are the things that I'm going to be doing with them, and that's how we generate it. So that those are the three aspects of universal identifier.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcelo.
Okay. Anything else?
I think these are all the questions we have so far. Anything else from the audience?
Okay, I'll keep going then. So these next two slides are the actual architecture diagrams of what we're doing in the cloud for data ingestion and for the customer microservice, right? And you'll see bulk raw data processing, delta BAU processing, master data processing. It's very complicated, and it is a very detailed map, and we can probably talk about each of these two slides for an hour. So here, let me make sure that's actually advancing. All right, and this is the profile microservices architecture. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to walk you through the subway map version of this. This is the greatly simplified, the very, very, very simplified version of what we're doing, and trying to put it in a way that actually makes sense. And again, happy to deep dive anything else, but this was a limited amount of time, so I decided to do the subway map version of it rather than the full version. So what happens today? The only place where you'll see a non-cloud or AWS icon is here. We actually use Informatica to convert our IPSIDIC files into a JSON format. It does address parsing, it does name parsing, and that's the only thing that they really do for us, is that conversion, because we literally can't use it in the cloud. We use data sync to move it into the cloud. That moves into the data standardization step, which is the data gateway that you saw earlier. That's where we do the match, merge, split, map, and master process. That data comes in, we do a whole bunch of quality checks, right? Are you the data that we expect to have? Are you, formatted in the way we expected you to come in? Do you have the minimum number of records that we expect to have in here? We do all that, then that's the first time the large files get split into individual records and go into the mastering process. As part of mastering, which is what we've partnered with the CDO to do, and that's its own universe. As part of that mastering process is really where they're looking at it and looking for duplicates and data quality checks and improvements. And that's when, once you've been mastered, we actually apply a universal identifier to you for the first time. And that's where we merge records rather than overwrite records. There may be cases where things don't fit into the process, and there's exception processes for all of those things. But I'll give you a little glimpse of what we're looking at here. The existing system, which is CIS, that does our mastering, had over 1,400 mastering rules, because it was basically rules that were established over time, probably over a decade. And that means that they're very difficult to troubleshoot. So sometimes things would master and we wouldn't know why. Some things wouldn't master, we wouldn't know why. Those 1,400 mastering rules are now fewer than 30. That really makes life much easier. And what we also did is we did a head-to-head comparison. We took 10 million records, 10 million real records, which we did anonymize. And we took those 10 million records, put the first one through the original CIS mastering process with the 1,400 mastering rules, and we put the same set of records through the MDM process with the fewer than 30 mastering rules, and we saw literally a 10% improvement in quality. And that's huge, right? When you're talking about fractions of a percentage point in being a significant movement, seeing 10% improvement in your data quality is something that we'll all feel and see. So that mastering process is huge. When you come out of that mastering process, you go into a DocDB NoSQL store. We went with NoSQL because we want to do a very fast. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt there. Some people miss here. What is What is mastering? Can you just go back there?
Okay, so what we call it is the black magic of data mastering. So there are a number of tools out there available for data mastering, but they all do very much the same way. They do it through machine learning and artificial intelligence, where they look for patterns within your data. So they look for two records when one is Robert Brown and the other one is Bob Brown, and they have two names that are very similar. They have the same address, but one has a social and the other one doesn't have a social. Boom. That's the same person. We know that's the same person, right? But it also looks at things that are more subtle. Robert Brown and Robert Brown, same address, same phone number, different age. Those are not the same person, right? those are senior and junior. By the way, senior and junior, hugely problematic for data quality, right? If you haven't done so, please don't name your son junior because it's probably going to cause him a problem in the future. I guarantee it. So the master data management, MDM, right, is what is looking at this with much more depth and detail than the two examples I gave you, to look for patterns within your data, to look for things that are either the same or are definitely different. So it will disambiguate two Robert Browns. And by the way, the reason I keep bringing Robert Brown is it's literally the most common name in the United States. I know this because one of my best friends is named Robert Brown. And, you know, I've known him for 30 years. And every step along the way, driver's licenses, mortgages, professional licenses, you name it, he's had a problem because there's so many damn Robert Browns, which is why I always use that example because it's a real example, right? So it will look for likenesses, differences, machine learning patterns, AI, and it will make decisions on these are really two different things, or these two things are the same, or these many different things will actually create a whole record. That was a very simple walkthrough through MDM. Probably could talk about an hour. Anything else?
We just got one here. Quick question: Did you integrate manual review override workflows for moderate to low probability dupes? How did you standardize the diverse international addresses?
Who asked that question?
This was Arvind Tanjirala. I'm sorry if
Arvind, good question. Somebody obviously has done this before. So Arvind International, it is a humongous pain in the rear. You know, the example, everybody knows the Springfield, USA example. The example I like to use, because I'm Hispanic, I was born in Chile, English is my first language, is Santiago. There are over 120 cities in the world named Santiago. Whether they're in Latin-speaking countries or Portuguese-speaking countries, sorry, Spanish-speaking or Portuguese, or former colonies thereof. But there are over 100 cities named Santiago, and all of them have a street called Alameda, which means main street. So international is a very interesting one because, you know, Chile uses regions, Japan uses cantons, Canada uses states, so that's easy, right? But you know, there's all these different variations on those things. So in the mastering process, we have a separate plugin for address validation, and almost everything we get in from the front end goes through that process to validate that address. We are now looking at equivalent tools to do address validation for international addresses, the Santiago problem we talked about. So international address is very, very interesting, but the best way to get ahead of that is to have very good filters on what gets into your world. We still have an underwriting process and an insurance buying process that may still rely on paper forms in some cases. So in those cases, it's a little bit more difficult to apply is this a valid international address into the paper form for obvious reasons, but you got to catch it at the perimeter. If you can't catch it at the perimeter, it's got to be one of your standardizations and quality checks before it goes into your mastering process. So if we add international addresses to the standardization work we're doing, and we decide that the data that we're getting is sufficiently not clean, we would have to run that address validation standardization tool. Pitney Bowes does one in the United States. Google does one. There's a whole bunch of them. The question is which is the one that's right for you. But that's the way you would catch it in that quality step before you go into mastering. And yes, there are manual processes for low probability. So it's not a black and white good or bad. It's a quality threshold that mastering applies. So if you're above this grade, you're a passing grade. If you're in this range, you're suspect. If you're below this range, you need to get pushed off into potentially a manual review. Long answer to short question. Hope I got you there, Arvind.
Yep, thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
Any consideration on using AWS Glue to prepare data, such as removing duplication?
So yes, we do actually use Glue for some of the standardization that we do, but duplication and disambiguation are two things that are data mastering centric, because even if we use Glue, we would still have to impose our own rules, which is how we got into the 1400 rules problem, right? Whereas if we're using a data tool that is doing AI machine learning, we can impose much smaller set of rules that the machine learning can then use to extrapolate patterns from and make those decisions, which is why it's a trust score rather than a straight black and white. right? This thing scored above an 80, therefore it's good, and we're going to trust it. This score is 80 to 60 and is mostly okay, but we'll do a couple of other quality checks. This thing is below a 60, which case it gets spat out and goes into another process, right? So yeah, we are using glue, but you don't want to use it to that level, or else you're going to be writing a lot of custom rules. Okay, anything else?
Use any lineage tool to track your lineage on your data?
We don't use a separate tool. We actually just capture the process along the way, right? We bring all the data in. Once it gets in, we know what's been brought in. We have histories. We have transaction IDs that help us track where it came from. So we keep track of all that for auditing purposes, but we didn't bring in a specific lineage tool for it. I don't know if we're to the level of complexity, because once it comes to us, it's already gone through a couple of steps along the way, and we trust the source, right? One of the important parts here is that we always trust the system of record where the contract was entered. So things like you really can't change your last name. You get married, you change your last name, happens all the time, but you can't do it through a web interface without there being legal documentation, because we're talking about annuities and life insurances, right? So that's not something you would write back to that system. That is still the system of record. The system of record would make that change, and it would flow up to us, and then it would show the next time you log in. But because those are trusted systems, and we always treat them as trusted systems, I think the lineage problem is not so complicated that we need a full third-party tool.
Got it. So the Informatica there is just for data quality then?
It's all it does is transform IPSIDIC to JSON, parse the address, parse the name. That's it. That's
Okay.
all we really use it. And actually, that's a bit of a spoiler. I'll tell you what we're going to do about that on my last slide. There's actually we're actually addressing that.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, one more question on the lineage. How are you exposing it? Right? Are you exposing to a catalog or somewhere for folks to browse through it?
No, right now it's there for troubleshooting purposes and for fraud detection or whatever other reason may be, but it's as an exception rather than a platform to browse the lineage. That has not been a business requirement so far. Nobody's come to us and said, hey, as regulatory, we need to go look at this data on a regular basis. So it's as needed kind of a thing. It's there, but it would probably be a query to go look something up for you right now. If something does come up, we'll add it, but we've not really had the need so far.
Okay, thank you. So one more question around the AAML that you said on the trust scores for mastering. So are those all homegrown, or are you using?
Okay. That is a third-party tool. I'm going to be real with you here, guys. I'm not going to tell you who they are because I'm not real happy with them right now. So I'm not going to give them any free advertising until they make me happy, honestly. It's a good tool, but it could have been a lot better.
I looked at one of the tools that starts with a T.
It's not that one. It's a tool that starts with an A. You can hit me up after the meeting and I can give you more on that, but I'm not giving them a free plug. Okay.
Marcelo, if I can ask a slightly digressing topic, I guess, more on the data security aspects thing. I wasn't sure if you said like if you move from an on-prem based architecture to the cloud thing. If you did, then were there like your users and others like CTO worried about how are we going to secure this, and were there any challenges that you faced, and how did you address those?
How much time do I have, Fernando? So yes, and we did. Very short answer is they had concerns, but remember this is a enterprise-wide move to the cloud. So our cloud team, Rich Acosta, who is freaking awesome, right? Again, plug for Rich Acosta, who heads our cloud team, did a really good job of really thinking about things like key management, data access to environments. So all that stuff basically came pre-qualified for us. So what we did very early on is we sat down with our architecture team and our standards teams, and we said, okay, enterprise architecture, give us your standards. We will commit to being a reference implementation for you. And we are literally a reference implementation of the cloud and development architectures from the enterprise team. And the reason we did that is because we know that if we partner with the enterprise architecture team, we also have an opportunity to influence those. So between cloud team and the enterprise architecture team, they had already laid a lot of the groundwork for us in those things. So it wasn't the first foray into the cloud with some of this customer data, but it is encrypted. It's encrypted at rest. It is, access limited, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have key management. We did it all right. And by the way, the reason that's really, really important, because doing it all right and using it and building a reference implementation of the enterprise architecture means that this thing is really reusable. Like, we recently sat down with the folks in AWS, and we figured out that if anybody's trying to solve the same problem, which at least 5 other groups within the company are, that's a savings of 6,000 man hours if you just take my code. Literally. Like, take it, change the variables, run it, do your thing. That's 6,000 man hours we'd be saving you, right? So that standardization and that adherence to standards ensures that while CTO and InfoSec and compliance and regulatory are concerned, those concerns are taken care of, and we invited them into the house day one. They've been with us since day one of development. They've been partners. They've had a voice in the conversation. Anytime they felt uncomfortable, we've addressed it. So we've put a lot of love into it. Honestly, that's just the easiest way to put it. We put a lot of love into it. We put a lot of effort into it, and we've done really well with that.
Thank you.
Awesome.
One more question, Marcelo, if I can.
I know Fernando's looking at his watch.
Yes,
one more question, and then I'm going to move to the next slide.
Let's do maybe one more question, and then Marcelo, if you can go to your closing slides.
I'll go quick. So what was that one question?
No, sorry. Since you touched upon security, I just want a short answer. Are you enforced to use tokenization on your data?
We do use JWT tokens as part of the
services
tokenization
infrastructure on your data, not the JWT.
No, we don't tokenize the data itself because it's internal to our infrastructure, and so we don't have to. It's just encrypted, and we communicate via universal identifier between systems rather than passing PII. So we've not had to tokenize it.
You don't have to. You just encrypt all data. Everything is like encrypted from source, or you encrypt it after you come to the cloud? Because the source sends you an encrypted one, or you let the raw data come to cloud?
It's not a short answer.
Okay.
It's not a short answer. Let me put it to you that way, but we can always circle back.
Okay.
So what is the value proposition? I'll fly through these really, really quick. You heard me talk about the large chunks of reusable infrastructure, process tooling, and code. We live it. We do it. We've already had one team pick up what we've done and used it. They probably saved them 3 or 4 months of development straight up front. Our CloudFormation scripts are 100% reusable. We have one CloudFormation script for each of the 4 platforms. Each of those CloudFormation scripts with variable changes builds each of our cloud infrastructure. So 100% reusable. Better customer satisfaction, solve all the problems we talked about. That absolutely helps. We're reducing talk time in the call centers because CSRs are always going to be able to find the right person that they're looking for, customer service representatives. There's never going to be any confusion. And in some cases today, they're doing what we call swiveling. They're moving from one application to another, literally, within their desk in order to be able to look things up. So that's how they do it. And of course, cost savings. We want to retire the IBM DB2 mainframe. We want to retire an Oracle rack platform. We have a large Hadoop bespoke Scala infrastructure that does data imports, and there's approximately 200 services that are leveraged on these old platforms that we want to collapse into maybe a dozen. So all of that is cost savings. It's not quite as hard and black and white as we would like it, but in the end, you're probably, in the $10 million plus range of savings that we're going to get out of this on the first year. How we got here, we were a team of 2, we're up to 33. That does not count the associated teams like MDM. We're acting as a single release train. These numbers, by the way, are as of December of last year, so we have not updated them yet. We went very quickly from 2 people up to the full-size team. We've done over 4,500 JIRA entries. We're 100% agile. We're CI/CD. We're getting better at CI/CD. We're not where I want us to be. We have, by the end of last year, we had created over 376,000 lines of code. What's really interesting there is we wrote our first story mid-March and mid-February, and we did our first check-in mid-March. That's really fast, right? To go from concept to actually writing code and actually making it meaningful code is really, really fast to do it in essentially 2.5 months, which we were able to do because of all the things that we were able to leverage that were already in existence in the cloud. Right? We didn't have to invent anything. We didn't have to go build 6 months worth of platform and foundation for what we needed to do. We just picked the bits off the shelf, plugged them together, and started writing business-centric, intellectual property related code, which is huge. And you heard me say reusable CloudFormation scripts. We've so far built 18 cloud environments. Profile microservices lagging behind the other two. But and I want to re-emphasize this. It's not often that you can take a CloudFormation script, build it once, change the variables, and build QA and build stage and build prod and build DR without any other changes other than those variables. So foundations are huge here, but those foundations gave us time to market, which has allowed us to actually get to the point where in December of last year, we released the first 3 million records into production. So we went from 2 people January 2022, December of 2022, first 3 million mastered records in production available for use, along with the microservices, along with the universal identifier. So huge, huge speed time to market. Next steps, what are we doing? We got 14 more systems to ingest. We have to build a disintermediation layer to allow people to really start using the application sooner, because we don't want to wait till we've built all the data out. So we're actually putting in a orchestration platform that will look like the endpoint for our microservices to you. But in reality, what we're doing in the background is we're sending data down to the data that's been mastered for data that's already been mastered, and data that has been mastered, we're going down the old route. And it's you as your consumer will just see your data quality get better and better, and the performance get better and better as we drop any of these legacy systems. We have a current floor of 250 milliseconds response time. We're shooting for 100 millisecond response time SLA as we roll this out. And we've got many, many, many more records yet to be processed out of the remaining 25 active, 28 active, 55, including inactive. But here are the two really cool things. We're probably going to wind up with 2 new platforms at the end of the year. The standards platform, you've heard us talk about the fact that we're utilizing those standards. We're the first ones to use them during the for the company. So we're actually spinning those off into their own infrastructure where anybody can access those standards. We're just the first ones to need it. But the really interesting thing is we want to get out of the business of having to go through Informatica. Not because we hate it, not because it's terrible, but because it's a single tool, it's in the data center, and it's a capacitated resource. We have 15 mainframe systems, 25 external data feeds, all of which are initial data loads, plus the daily deltas, plus writebacks. And daily deltas are going to need to also go through Informatica. So that's quickly going to not become tenable. So with the help of the nice folks at AWS ProServe, here's your plug, guys, we actually went to them and said, look, we can't be the only ones who have a problem with mainframe files that need to get in the cloud. What can we do here? And so with their help, we're actually building a standardized independent platform that actually takes that mainframe file, that IPSIDIC file, in the cloud, converts it into JSON in the cloud, and then lets us have it as a usable standard format. And this is something that's going to be used by us. It's needed by the distribution domain, by the product domain. It's needed by the contract domain. So this will become not just our platform, but a platform for the organization. We're building it standalone so somebody else can own it if they want. But we're actually really excited about that. I know that sounds horribly geeky, but that's what I do for a living. We're really excited about having the ability to take those mainframe files, put them up in the cloud, and actually make them usable, because it's going to solve a lot of problems for a lot of people within Prudential. So that's really what the next year for us looks like. And by the end, if I talk to you guys this time next year, I will have had, more than half of my records in place. I'll have my 2 platforms in place, and we'll probably be talking about getting ready to move into the next thing we're going to modernize. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcelo. Well, like 30 more seconds, like one very, very, very last question here. That if Kappa or GDPR request comes in to delete a customer record, what do you do? Do you delete the UID or just deactivate it?
Oh, CCPA, CPRA. No, because remember, we still need to keep enough information about you in order to be able to service you as a customer. So while you can tell us to forget about you in terms of marketing, we can't forget about you because you got a contract with us, right? So CCPA, CPRA is actually being handled by an integration with OneTrust, where the marketing team is handling that set of requests. And what they'll do is they'll propagate that information to us. And then what we'll do is we'll drop a flag in the user profile that says CCPA, CPRA request, which means this data is not available to applications that are consuming it for marketing purposes. That was the quick answer.
Thank you, Marcelo. Awesome. That was great. Thank you everyone for the questions. Up next, we'll